Jews, the Sanhedrin's authority extended. So Saul heard that there were Jews in Damascus, and he went to the Sanhedrin, and he asked for letters so that he could return them bound to Jerusalem, so they could be held over for some sort of trial. I think what happened in the death of Stephen was very unusual. The Sanhedrin stoned Stephen to death, as we know, or gave the word that he should be stoned to death. Their law did not permit them to crucify anybody, and it had to be something religious that somebody would have done. Generally, it was for some immorality or some sin. And so Stephen's death just opened the door so that they could persecute and kill those who belonged to the way. It gave probably authority to Saul to want to carry that out, since he was there present at Stephen's stoning. And so he asked for those letters. And I have to tell you, the journey to Damascus was a long one. It was 140 miles away. He was very zealous. 140 miles, and he was going on foot. I walk quite often, almost every day, and my average speed is about 3 miles per hour. Chuck's is about 2 to 2.5 miles per hour. He walks slower than I do. I'm just thinking 140 miles. And they say that it was accomplished in 1 week's time. That would be approximately 20 to 21 miles per day that they covered. You were doing nothing from dawn to dusk but walking. Paul was escorted by officers of the Sanhedrin, not officers of the Roman Empire. And so that you might know, the Sanhedrin was abolished after Jerusalem fell in 70 AD. So they had great power at this time. And Saul was convinced that the Christians were heretics, and that the honor of God was what was in preparation to be exterminated by this group of the way and following this one named Jesus. He was actually trying to take the place of God Almighty. So the spread of Christians to foreign cities made matters much worse. And so he wanted to get to Damascus before that spread much further into the world. The journey took him through Galilee, the place where Jesus did so many miracles, where so many people were converted. His disciples had come, most of them out of Galilee. Jews, people of all kinds were healed of all kinds of diseases, and even slaves were converted to Christ. Surely all this came into Saul's mind as he was traveling through Galilee, only making him more incensed to get rid of them. Damascus. You had to ascend Mount Hermon, and as you crested over the top, you could see Damascus laid out in the valley below, the plain below. And it has been said by those in the East, it's a metaphor, that Damascus looks like a handful of pearls on a goblet of emerald. A handful of pearls on a goblet of emerald. But there's something that's known about this height and this depth. That the cool air would rush down on the road to Damascus, and the heat from the plain below would rise up, and they would meet, and terrible, thunderous lightning storms would occur. Now Saul is on the way and accompanied by officers of the Sanhedrin. Instead of arresting someone, Saul himself is arrested by the very one that he had been seeking to act on behalf of God himself. When Saul asked, "Who are you, Lord?" he was not proclaiming Jesus as Lord. He was simply asking the question, "Who are you that you are speaking to me?" I mean, who are you, this voice that's coming down calling out my name? I don't recognize you. And the answer came, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." The persecutor is faced by the one who was being persecuted, namely Jesus Christ. And here he is, it says that he fell down on the ground. I think you've heard of stories where men and women have to be down on their backs. They have to be looking up to see Jesus. Perhaps in a jail cell or at the end of what seems like everything before they can turn to the Lord and cry out, "Who are you? What do you want with me?" Jesus told Paul or Saul to get up and go into the city where he would be told what to do. What could Saul do in that moment? He was completely blind. He could not find those who he was seeking to take back to Jerusalem. He couldn't even find the people he had to go to with the papers to take the people back to Jerusalem that he wanted to take. And he was completely helpless. And what good were the officers to him now? No good. He surrendered. Whoever this was, Jesus, whom he had been trying to get rid of, is speaking to him. In other words, Saul gave up his will to the will of God. He had nothing else that he could do. He gave up his mind to the will of God, and because obviously his mind was full of something other than the will of God, and he had to let that go. And he gave up his body to the will of God, for God had completely blinded him, and he was at the mercy of God. In the past several weeks, it's been difficult for me. Over the past few weeks, I have been with a great many of people who have died, who have wanted to live, who had the desire to live, but who acknowledged that their physical body could not handle it any longer. And they had to go. They were at the mercy of God. They had to come to an acceptance, a surrender to him. It was not easy. And I imagine it was not easy for Saul either. His complete desire was to be God's servant, and somewhere along the way, he could not see God. He was serving something other